what I want to do now, just as a closing, is go through some of the things that Imam Ghazzali in his Ihya radiallahu anhu mentions about fasting. Kitab Asrar al-Siyam is the book, which is the book of the secrets of fasting. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So he says that one of the greatest blessings that Allah has given us is, and that He has given to protect us from the plots of shaitan and the artistry, the clever machinations of shaitan, and to destroy shaitan's hope and really make him despair, is He made fasting a fortress for His awliya and a junnah, a shield, to protect himself from shaitan. As-siyamu junnah. Fasting is a shield, right? You hide behind it. And he said that he also has explained to us in many verses in the Quran and Hadith that the means by which shaitan takes control of the heart is hidden shahawat. The human being is destroyed by two things, shahawat and shubuhat. Shahawat are sensory, they relate to pleasure, excessive pleasure, the stomach, the genitals, all of the things that go with shahawat. And shubuhat relate to the heart, how somebody understands things. So shaitan works on shubuhat first. Right? It's actually better for him to have somebody who's a Christian, a Trinitarian, or something like that. Because then he doesn't care. They can do all they want. But if he can't get to you, if you have been given mana'a, like a protection, immunity from the shubuhat, and that's done by following the rightly guided imam, by having your creed correct. So you follow the aqeedah of the Muslims. And anything that has shubha in it, you flee from it. And the second, by making your ibadah in accordance with the sunnah, so you don't allow bid'ah to come into your ibadah. With those things, you're protected from shubuhat, and actually shubuhat are easier to protect oneself. If he sees that he can't get you from there, if you're protected, then he'll come with shahawat and try to destroy you through shahawat. And then the next thing that he mentions is the hadith in which the Prophet ﷺ, it's a Hasan hadith from Abu Hurairah, in which the Prophet ﷺ said, "As-sawmu nisfu as-sabr." Fasting is half of patience. In other words, it's half of how you learn and acquire patience. By being able to fast and be patient about food, which is the primary urge, and sex, which is the secondary urge. If somebody can control those two aspects of the self, then he can be patient about other things. If he can't control those, everything else will be out of control. But then he mentions the other hadith which says that as-sabru nisfu al-iman, and he derives from that that therefore fasting is half of iman, because 1/4 of iman. Thank you. These engineers are useful. That if iman is half of, sabr is half of iman, and fasting is half of sabr, then it's 1/4 of your iman if you fast. And then he also said, which is very important, that the Messenger of Allah said, كُلُّ حَسَنَةٍ بِعَشْرِ أَمْثَالِهَا إِلَى 700 ضَعْفٍ إِلَّا الصِّيَامِ. This is a hadith Qudsi. Every good action is 10 multiplied by 10 to 700, except for fasting. Except for fasting. إِلَّا الصِّيَامُ فَإِنَّهُ لِي وَأَنَا أَجْزِي بِهِ. Except for fasting, fasting is my own, and I reward it. Now, some of the ulama actually said that the meaning, as-siyamu li, fasting is mine. In other words, Allah is the only thing in creation, in reality, that is absolutely independent and needs nothing. Everything else in creation needs something. And so fasting is, of all the acts of ibadah we do, it is the most godlike. It is the most godlike, because Allah does not eat or drink, or any of the actions that go with. So, fasting is Allah, and He rewards it. And this is again taking on the تَخَلَّقُ بِأَخْلَاقِ اللَّهِ, take on the qualities that Allah has described Himself with, of Al-Kareem, Al-Sabur, right, all these, Ar-Rahim, Ar-Rahman. And then, again, the ayah in the Quran, إِنَّمَا يُوَفَّى الصَّابِرُونَ أَجْرَهُمْ بِغَيْرِ حِسَابٍ. Allah tells us in the Quran that the patient people, He gives them reward without any reckoning. So again, fasting and patience are deeply related. And another thing about fasting, as-siyamu is it's half of patience. وَالصَّبْرُ مُفْتَحَ الظَّفَرِ or مُفْتَحَ الْفَرَجِ. And patience is the key to openings from Allah. And this is why the greatest victory of the Muslims was in Ramadan, which is al-Badr. And it was in Ramadan. And also the Fath that Allah gave the Messenger of Allah was in Ramadan. So there's great and many great victories in Ramadan, in the history of Islam. Many, many great victories. And then he said it is enough to know the blessing of the fast that Allah swears, that the Messenger of Allah swore, وَالَّذِي نَفْسِي بِيَدِهِ لَخَلِيفُ فَمَّ الصَّائِمِ أَطْيَبُ عِنْدَ اللَّهِ مِنْ رِيحِ الْمِسْكِ. The foul smell of a faster coming from the mouth of the faster is more pure with Allah than the scent of musk. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِنَّمَا يَمَرُ شَهْوَتَهُ وَطَعَامُهُ وَشَرَابُهُ لِأَجْلِ. He has given up his drink, his food, his drink, and his shahwa, his desire, لِأَجْلِ, for Allah's sake. إِنَّ الصِّيَامَ لِي وَأَنَا أَجْزِي بِهِ. So fasting is mine, and I will give it. And then the صائم فرحتان, فرحة عند إفطاره وفرحة عند لقاء ربه. And then he said, the hadith, which has some weakness in it, but it says, بِكُلِّ شَيْءٍ بَعْدٍ, and we went through the أبواب العلم when we covered that section on there. بِكُلِّ شَيْءٍ بَعْدٍ وَبَابَ الْعِبَادَةِ وَالصَّوْمِ. Everything has a door, and the door of worship is fasting. And this is another hadith indicates that is the one who prevents us from worship more than anybody is shaitan. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the Messenger of Allah said, إِنَّ الشَّيْطَانَ لَيَجْرِي فِي ابْنِ آدَمَ مَجَارِيَ الدَّمِ. That shaitan flows in man with the blood, the flowing of the blood, which is a proof that, for me, is a proof that long before Thomas Harvey ever came up with circulation of blood, that the Messenger of Allah knew about circulation of blood, because majra is a place where something flows. And he said, إِنَّ الشَّيْطَانَ لَيَجْرِي فِي ابْنِ آدَمَ مَجَارِيَ الدَّمِ. He flows in man in the places the blood flows. So, shaitan gets in through the blood, and that's why alcohol and haram food is an easy inroad for shaitan into the heart. And the more pure your food is, the purer you become, guarding your food from shubuhat. So when you fast, because you don't have food in you, you're actually making, there's an addition to that hadith, which is mudraj, probably from later, not from the Sahaba, فَضَيِّقُوا عَلَى مَجَارِيَ الشَّيْطَانِ. Constrict the ways that shaitan can flow in you, بِالْجُوَعِ, by hunger. And then another thing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Messenger of Allah, it's a weak hadith, no mufsa'in ibadah. The sleep of the faster is worship. Because if he's fasting, he's in worship. So it's true, even if the hadith is not strong, the meaning is true, in that if you're fasting, you're worshiping, and sleeping while you're fasting is mubah. So even a sleeper is in ibadah when he's fasting. So that's something that no other ibadah has. And also إذا دخلوا شهر رمضان فتحت أبواب الجنة وغلقت أبواب النار وصفدت الشياطين ونادى مناد يا باغي الخير هلم يا باغي الشر اقصر. That when Ramadan comes, the gates of paradise are open, the doors of Jahannam are closed, and the shayateen are locked up. And then a caller calls from the angelic realm, "O seeker of good, come for this month. And O seeker of evil, stop. Don't desist from your evil." Waki', who is the teacher of Imam Shafi'i radiallahu anhu, said about Allah's word, كُلُوا وَشَرَبُوا هَنِيئًا بِمَا أَسْرَفْتُمْ فِي الْأَيَّامِ الْخَالِيَةِ. The Ayyam al-Khaliya, the past days, are Ayyam al-Siyam. So Allah says in paradise, eat and drink because of what you were doing in those previous days in the world when you were fasting. Now, eat and drink, enjoy yourself. So you're giving up here, and obviously, for a person, if you're told, in fact that was the test they used for emotional intelligence, was to give children, tell them they could have, 2 cookies later or 1 now. And always they found the intelligent children would say 2 later. So a sign of aql is putting off a short-term pleasure for a greater long-term pleasure. That is a sign of intellect. And so that's why Allah says that these people that do this are ulul albab. They're the people of intellect that recognize putting off dunya pleasure for the sake of Allah is intelligent. And then another thing which is really important, which he says is because this is such, you are really defeating the enemy of Allah, which is shaitan, by taking control of all the things that shaitan uses to fight you and to fight Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's his irada for human beings, his will for human beings, which is to believe in him and follow him. And that's why he mentions that Allah says, إِن تَنْصُرُ اللَّهَ يَنْصُرْكُمْ وَيُثَبِّتْ أَقْدَامَكُم. If you give victory to Allah through fasting and conquering shaitan, Allah will give victory to you and make you firm. And that's one of the things you want. Sabr is part of sabat, right? Sabr. So we're learning that. And then he said, and by doing that also Allah says, وَالَّذِينَ جَاهَدُوا فِينَا لَنَهْدِيَنَّهُمْ سُبُلَنَا وَإِنَّ اللَّهَ مَعَ الْمُحْسِنِينَ. Allah is with the muhsineen. And then he also mentioned that إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُغَيِّرُ مَا بِقَوْمٍ حَتَّى يُغَيِّرُ مَا بِأَنفُسِهِمْ. التغيير, he said, is تكثير الشهوات. That's one of the interpretations of that ayah. That Allah will not change the people by taking away their blessings until they become preoccupied with their shahawat. So they fall into, like this society, it's the best example of a pleasure culture. Everything is geared towards pleasure. There's no, people here, the idea of fasting is so alien to them now because they eat all day long. And that's not something even not that long ago, people did not eat. You didn't snack all day long. There weren't snack machines everywhere. This is all the grazing culture, right? Al-An'am, the cattle people. Right? Seriously, it's like cows that just graze out, and this is life, grazing. No. Yeah, the shayateen, it's only because there's one hadith that says maradatul jinn. The bad jinn. So it's not the shayateen al-ins. And also some of the ulama, like Imam al-Qabisi al-Fasi, who is a Maliki scholar, he was asked why is it that people still get bad thoughts in Ramadan. And his explanation was that, he said the hadith indicate only the kafir jinn are locked up. The fisaq from the believing jinn are not locked up. But Allah knows best, because there's no hadith. He doesn't have textual basis for that. And he admitted that at the end. He said that would seem a high probability there. And Allah knows best. But also you have enough. I think it would be interesting to do, this is when you have a khilafah and you're controlling the world and there's no wars, and you can actually occupy Muslims doing intelligent statistical studies. It would be interesting to see studies done about crime rates and things like that if they do go down in Ramadan. I think that would be kind of an interesting thing to do. So there's somebody has a PhD thesis there, convince a university to give you funding for that, huh? Now, a couple of things here. Imam Ghazzali, radiallahu anhu, mentions, he goes into the fiqh issues, and we covered that last night, about the fiqh of fasting. There's two fiqhs of fasting. There's the fiqh al-zahir or fiqh al-batin. There's the outward fiqh, which is the concern of the fuqaha, and then there's the inward fiqh, which is the concern of the qawm or the Sufiya. And the outward fiqh is to make sure that your outward fasting is acceptable, maqbool. The inward fiqh is to make sure that your inward fasting is acceptable. And there's a hadith that indicates this very clearly, in which the Prophet ﷺ said that many people who fast, right, كَمْ مِنْ صَائِمٍ لَيْسَ لَهُ مِنْ صَوْمِهِ إِلَّا الْجُوعُ وَالْعَطَشُ. How many fasters gain nothing from their fast except hunger and thirst? So it means, in other words, outwardly the fast is correct, but inwardly they're breaking their fast constantly. Because if you're backsliding, if you're doing all these things. Now, just a few things about that. He says there are three types of fasters. Sawm al-umum, the general fasting. Sawm al-khusus, and then the elect fasting. Wa sawm al-khusus al-khusus, and then the fasting of the elect. He says that the fasting of the common people is basically leaving the kaf al-batan wal-farj an qada' al-shahwa. It's just preventing the stomach and the genitals from gaining pleasure during the daylight hours. That's the fasting that any Muslim is capable of doing. He said the fasting of the elect is the fasting كفع السمع والبصر واللسان واليد والرجل. Because remember, Ibn Ashar radiallahu anhu talks about the seven, right? You have to protect the seven jawarih, right? You're responsible for them. You have to protect the eyes. إن السمع والبصر والفؤاد كل أولئك كان عنه مسؤولا. You have to protect the ears. You have to protect the tongue. You have to protect the hands, the stomach, the genitals, and the feet. So two of them are covered in the outward fasting. So a person who's fasting and they're not eating or having sexual relations or any type of sexual behavior, whether it's masturbation, any type of that person has taken hold of two of those seven, and those are called the madakhil al-shaytan, thuhur al-shaytan. Those are the entrances of shaitan. Some of the ulama, Ibn al-Qayyim, rahimahullah, mentioned that the body of the human being is like a country, and the capital is the heart. And the borders, the boundaries, are the seven limbs. And you have to guard the seven limbs with vigilance. And the heart is the one that sends out the command to guard the limbs, sends out the armies to guard them. So shaitan comes in to the heart through one of those seven things. So the point of the fasting is to protect the boundaries during Ramadan and guard them so that the heart has a chance to draw near to Allah. لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ كُتِبَ عَلَيْكُمُ الصِّيَامُ كَمَا كُتِبَ عَلَى الَّذِينَ مِنْ قَبْلِكُمْ لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ. It's in order to learn taqwa. And taqwa is محل التقوى ها هنا وأشار إلى قلبه. The place of taqwa is here in the heart. The Prophet ﷺ said, التقوى ها هنا وأشار إلى قلبه 3 مرات. So taqwa is in the heart. So you're trying to learn taqwa, and the taqwa is the heart. So what you're doing is you're protecting the heart by stopping, by protecting the inroads into the heart of shaitan. And Allah has helped you by locking up the shayateen. So He's put constraints on the shayateen. So Allah is giving us a great assistance in this month. And then He's helped us by making it a farm to not eat. In other words, the two sources of all the troubles, the most basic ones, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has commanded it. But then He left us, it's up to us, because it can't all be, right? There has to be some mujahada. Allah left it up to us to guard the eyes, the tongue, the ears, the hands, and the feet. And that's the fasting of the elect. So they're fasting from all 7 limbs. Right? So you're guarding your tongue, you're guarding your eyes, you're guarding your hands, you're guarding your feet. That's what you have to do during Ramadan. Don't look at the haram, don't speak the haram, and don't listen to the haram. Allahumma sa'im. Somebody starts to backbite, Allahumma sa'im. You have to protect yourself. Don't ruin my fast. The dua of the Prophet about Ramadan, Allahumma sallimna Ramadan wa sallim Ramadan minna. Oh Allah, give us Ramadan and protect Ramadan from our evil. You don't want Ramadan to get a portion of your evil. You want to get a portion of Ramadan's good. And you don't want to give Ramadan anything bad. And this is why it has what's known as hurma zamaniyah. It has the sanctity of time. And that's why wrong action in Ramadan is graver than wrong action other times. Because Allah has given this month a hurma, a sanctity. And you have to guard the sanctity of the month. And you guard it by not doing what Allah tells you. And this is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, one of the things that Allah said to the human being is that He told us that we had to addir amanat ila ahliha, to give the amanat to its people. That's one of the signs of the believer, right? The believer gives trust that have been entrusted with him to those who own the trust. So if you're given a trust and somebody tells you, I'm leaving this, I'm entrusting you with this, but this is mine. I'm entrusting it with you, but this is mine. The mu'min is the one, yu'min comes from the same root of amana. La imana, meaning la amanata lahu. He has no iman, the one who has no amana. Allah has given us a trust. Inna sam'a, wal basar, wal fu'ada, kullu ulaika kana anhu mas'ula. Those things, the sight, the sound, the hearing, and the heart itself, which generates all of the actions of the other limbs. You are mas'ul. In other words, they're amanat that Allah has put you in responsibility for. And you have to bring back the amana on Yawm al-Qiyamah. يَوْمَ لَا يَنْفَعُ مَالٌ وَلَا بَنُونَ إِلَّا مَنْ أَتَى اللَّهَ بِقَلْبٍ سَلِيمٍ. He brings back the amana sound. He hasn't destroyed it. قَدْ خَابَ مِنْ دَسَّاهَا. Right? He's been destroyed, the one who pollutes this trust that Allah has given you, because the nafs is a trust. And like that, children are a trust. Your children are amana. Right? So these are all trusts Allah has given you. And fasting, Allah is teaching us how to honor the trust and give it back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala the way Allah wants it, which is, He wants your tongue to be free of slander. Kidib, namima, ghiba, zur, all these things. He wants it to be free of that. He wants your ears to be free of hearing the haram. He wants your eyes to be free of seeing the haram. He wants your hands to be free of doing anything haram, your feet to be free of going anywhere haram, and your genitals free of going to a place that's haram, and your stomach free of taking in, imbibing anything or eating anything that's haram. That's what Allah wants. He wants us to protect these trusts that He's given us, and the way He's teaching us to do that is fasting. This is the madrasa to learn these things. And then finally, the fasting of the elect. And he says, it is the صوم القلب عن همم الدنية والأفكار الدنيوية. It is the fasting of the heart on low aspirations, from low aspirations, or from worldly thoughts. So in other words, the fasting of the elect is that your aspiration is not for dunya. And that's why in Ramadan, infaq, because giving out is for akhirah. Whereas in the other months you're busy trying to acquire wealth, in Ramadan you should be busy trying to get rid of wealth for the sake of Allah. You're not in a dunya mode, you're in a akhirah mode, right? You're in an akhirah mode. You have to change In this month, you have to change the way you're thinking. And then, afkar al-dunyawiyya. If one of the things about the people, one of the scholars of Andalusia said that the first degree of wilayah with Allah is muhasabat al-khawatir, is to begin to take thoughts to account, right? And that's the beginning of it. Yazin al-khatira bil-qistasi, that he begins to measure the thought based on the mizan of the sharia. That's what the wali does, and that's why he's a wali. Ramadan is a time to do muhasabah of your heart. In other words, if you begin to think about things that are dunyawī things, because you don't want to be, none of us want to be with Allah an ammi. In Arabic, ammi means suqi, right? Do you say that in Iraq? Suqi? Suqi? They say that in Sham? Suqi. Somebody who's like, their himna is in the marketplace. You have to rise above that. And the thing about Islam, an ammi does not mean that, there's a lot of scholars that think because they're learned, they're not awam. But they're awam, because the ammi can be the street sweeper who only knows fard ayn and knows a few surahs from the Quran, but his heart is with Allah. And that's why he asked, how many people are not fasting, but with Allah they're fasting? And how many people who are fasting, but with Allah they're not fasting? Because there's people during the year who aren't, they're guarding their eyes, their ears, their tongue, their feet, their genitals, their stomach. So in reality, they're doing the purpose of fasting, because fasting is just an exercise to learn how to do it properly. Whereas other people, they're fasting physically, but with Allah they're not fasting. So that's the point. So when he's talking about the khususi, don't think that's somebody who knows Imam Sibari's al-Kitab and he's a great grammarian, or he knows all the tafasir, or he knows. That's not what he's talking about. These people can be almost illiterate if the heart is with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I mean, look at Imam Sahnun. Muhammad bin Sahnun, who's the son of Sahnun who wrote the Mudawwana, he had a majlis in Al-Qayrawan. And in this majlis, every day, he said a man would come into the majlis and walk over people's shoulders and go up to the shaykh. He was teaching in a chair, and he'd start whispering into his ear for a while, and then he would leave. And he was doing this every time the shaykh would teach. The shaykh actually told people to move away so that he wouldn't have to go over there helping out. One day the man stopped coming. And Imam Sahnun, Muhammad bin Sahnun, asked some of the people, where's that man who used to come here every day? And they said, we don't know. And he asked somebody to go find him. He found him, and he came, and he said, what happened? You stopped visiting me. And the man said, subhanallah, I have to explain myself. Some people who envy you, I'm a very poor man, and I have a lot of daughters that I need to get married. Some people who envy you, because he was a qadi, and they came to me and said, go and bother him every day in his majlis, and if you can make him angry and humiliate him in front of all his students, we'll give you money so you can marry your daughters. So I used to come every day, and I would curse you in your ear, and I would say all those horrible things, and I realized it wasn't having an effect on you, and so I just gave up. And Muhammad ibn Sahnun said, why didn't you just come and ask me for some money? I would have given you. But I mean, that's where you want, that's the thing that you want to learn from fasting, is that is the sabr of the people of the Messenger of Allah. That's the sabr of the family, that's the sabr of Salman and Minna al-Bayt, Salman from our family. Salman lived, he was patient, he was a Zoroastrian. He used to see them blowing out, the fire would get blown out and they'd light it and then they'd tell the worshippers it never goes out. And his father was in charge of it, so he knew it was a lie. So he wanted to find where it was. He went to the Christians, he was with a monk serving him for years, and he saw the monk stealing all the people's money and burying it in his backyard. And then he went to another monk, and he was actually a good monk. He told him that there's a prophet in the end of time coming to Yathrib. And that's where he went, and he had the sign. But the thing is, he was patient through this entire journey. He was just seeking the truth. Yeah? And if you look at the patience of the Prophet ﷺ all through that tribulation that we saw, that is what fasting really is about. It's about learning how to control the heart and gaining this ability. So, basically, in terms of this month, here's my suggestion to myself, first and foremost. Yeah, you should. I mean, I'm saying in Ramadan that would break the fast. That's all I was saying. I know, but so is lying, and people lie, and so is, people do things that are haram. There's a khilaf about it anyway. According to the Malikis, the dominant opinion is that it's prohibited. According to Ahmad ibn Hanbal, it's considered mubah without any fantasizing. He considered it like hijama or something like that. So it's a khilafi issue, but I was just using that because some people might think that fasting is just from sexual relations with somebody else, but it includes that. So any type, even tafakkur, fantasizing, that would lead to that. All of that's haram. So anyway, during this month, and then inshallah I'm going to close this on, there's a group of people that's leaving at 2:30, but during this month, my recommendation to myself and all of you is don't do a lot of talking. Utilize the time. Everybody should be appreciating that, all the other Muslims. Don't waste your time. This is a month that the Salaf used to, for 6 months before Ramadan, they would beg Allah to let them see the next Ramadan, and then 6 months after Ramadan, they would beg Allah to accept the previous Ramadan. So this is not a time like other times. We all have to understand that. And the other thing is, none of us knows if this is our last Ramadan. And none of us even knows will we make it to the end of this Ramadan. So this is seize the moment. You really utilize this time, all of us. Don't let the month pass and then the last few days and you're regretting, I should have done more. I mean, you do that anyway, but hopefully it won't be as bad as some people who will have done very little. I mean, hopefully we'll do a lot, and still there's going to be a sense that we didn't do enough, because human beings, Imam Ghazzali said, the greatest proof of the deficiency of man is that he never does anything except that he realizes afterwards he could have done it better than anything. So, I mean, there's always improvement. But the point is, utilize the time, utilize the night, right? Take some portion of the night. It's mandib to do khatam of the Quran in the Taraweeh, but even one surah is effectual. So even if you did your Taraweeh with Qul Huwallahu Ahad, if that's all you know, and you did your rakats, that counts as Qiyam al-Layl. So you want to do the Qiyam every night. Even if you're going to just do 20 rakats with Qul Huwallahu Ahad, do Qiyam al-Layl. In fact, the end of Al-Khadim says, towards the end of time, it's good to do night prayers with like Qul Huwallahu Ahad, إِذَا زُلْزِلَتِ الْأَرْضُ زِلْزَالَهَا, the surahs that have a lot of reward mentioned in them, just because there's so little time, and most people don't have the himmah to do a lot anymore. So utilize the time. Try to do the duha prayer, right? So, I mean, basically try to get up before the Fajr, do some qiyam before Fajr, and then utilize the time after Fajr. Try not to sleep after that time. It's makruh in any case, but in Ramadan, we should be gaining that time even more so than other times. And then try to do the duha. The Prophet ﷺ told Abu Hurairah to do the duha, not to leave it ever. And so you should try to do it. It's a mandub, and it's a very strong, it has strong madad, because the Prophet did do it continuously. 2, 4, 6, or 8 rakats before the zawal, all the way up to the zawal. For the Malikis and the Hanafis, they have the during the time of the Hajra, that they can't pray the Nafila. And then prayer on time. Prayer on time should be any time. Imam Malik radiallahu anhu relates in the Muwatta, لَا أَرَى مِنْ أَهَمِّ أُمُورِكُمْ الصَّلَاةِ. The most important of all your affairs is your prayer. فَمَنْ حَفِظَهَا وَحَافِظَ عَلَيْهَا فَقَدْ حَفِظَ دِينَهُ. Whoever guards it and is vigilant about its times has guarded his deen. وَمَنْ ضَيْعَهَا فَهُوَ لِمَا سِوَاهَا أَضِيعَ. Whoever is negligent of it, then he's negligent more so about other affairs in his life. So prayer, and then we heard earlier that the Messenger of Allah on his deathbed, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, his wasiyah to his ummah, as the last words were as-salah, as-salah. Prayer is over everything. Guard your prayer and use this time to discipline yourself to be praying on time. Right? Really use it to discipline yourself. If you weren't praying on time before Ramadan, and you should have been, but if you weren't, then use this time to discipline yourself to pray on time. If you're working, just stop. You know, because your prayer is more important than your job. I guarantee you. Prayer is more important than your job. Do your prayer. And then, particularly the time between Asr and Maghrib is a very strong time throughout the year. It's a time of dhikr, but during the time, وَالْعَصْرِ إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لَفِي خَسْرٍ. It's a very special time. إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا. Except for the people who believe. It's a time of loss for other people. And that's why in this culture you see people at the end of the day, they're worn out. They have to go drink, and they call it happy hour in this culture. Right? No, seriously, they call it happy hour. They go and have to have oblivion so that they don't have to think about how meaningless their lives are. That's a time when we're preparing for sunset, which means death for us. Sunset is a metaphor for death. And Asr, from Asr to Maghrib, that's your later years in the lives of man. That period is representative of, and the fasting, breaking the fast, is like the Messenger, لِلصَّائِمِ فَرْحَتَانِ. There's two joys. فَرْحَةٌ عند إفطاره, a farha when he breaks his fast, وفرحة عند لقاء ربه وحين يلقى ربه. So there's an analogy being made there that the breaking of the fast is similar to meeting your Lord. In other words, when the day is over and death is over, you go back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then after you break your fast, the best thing, break it on rutab or tamar or hasawat min al-ma. If you don't have any of that on anything, you can just break the fast. If there's no food around, then you pray anyway. And the delaying of it is only makruh if it's delayed out of thinking that it's better, right? Then it becomes a bid'ah. But if you had a valid reason to delay breaking the fast, then it's perfectly fine. But don't eat before you pray Maghrib. And if you go to Muslim houses, a lot of times they'll ask you, do you want to eat first or pray? Tell people, let's pray first. Don't be shy about that, because people will eat and the prayer, Maghrib, goes out of the time. Right? Maghrib is a very short time window, and you don't want to delay it, because it's most of the ulama are that it's a daruri time. Right? After it comes in, time for adhan, to do wudu, to find a pure place, khalas. During the fasting, you're given a little window of breaking the fast with dates and water. Do the dua, right? Allahumma laka sumtu wa bika amantu wa ala rizqika aftartu faghfir li ma qaddamtu wa ma akhartu ya rabbil alameen. And then when you finish it, ذهب الظمأ وابتلت العروق وثبت الأجر إن شاء الله. That's a good thing to do. If you eat at somebody's house, أفطر عندكم الصائمون وصلت عليكم الملائكة وأكل طعامكم الأبرار وصلت عليكم الملائكة وذكركم الله في من عنده. These are good things to learn and to practice them and to learn the du'as. And then the Isha prayer, if you have a strong azima, then it's better to pray in your house. In other words, if you're going to do night prayers, it's better to pray in your house. If you don't have a strong azima and you know yourself, or there's a muqri who's going to do khatam of Quran, and you want to do the khatam with it's mandub, right? Yundabu khatmuha. So if you want to do the khatam in the masjid, that's a good thing also. Avoid what unfortunately a lot of our brothers are afflicted with is this idea that the Taraweeh is only 8 rakats. And so they say, after the 8 finishes, they say, alhamdulillah, we're following the sunnah. Right? And then they go outside and talk for the next hour. Right? Outside, above the masjid. Just admit, I'm lazy, or hey, it's really 20s long for me. But don't start justifying, sunnah, brother, I'm following sunnah. Because sunnah is not to sit around at the door of the masjid and talk. I guarantee you that. The Prophet ﷺ did not waste his time. An empty talk at the door of the masjid that's suqa. I mean, that's amni, really. And we don't want to be part of that. And don't belittle people, don't look down on people. I'm not, don't want to get judgmental about people. Everybody's where they're at for whatever reason. But the point is, don't see yourself as better than them. But thank Allah that He hasn't afflicted you with that affliction, because it's an affliction. And when the Prophet saw afflicted people, he said, Alhamdulillah, alladhi afani mimma starakum bihi, wa faddalani ala kathiran mimman kharaqa tafdila. That's not arrogance to recognize a ni'mah that Allah has given you. It's arrogance when you think that you deserve it more than they do. Because it's just a fadl that Allah has given you for whatever reason. And He knows. And He might, a'udhu billah, nasallallahu al-thabat wal-khatam al-hasan, but He could take that away from you and give your state to that person or better and put you there sitting at the door of the masjid talking. And one of the men who accused Mu'adh ibn Jabal of doing something haram, he made a dua against him, and Mu'adh was mustajab al-dua. He was known for that. And this man was seen in his old age pinching girls on the streets of Medina with his, they said his eye over his eyes had fallen over. Like the eyebrow had literally fallen over his eyes. And he'd pinched, and that was an ibtila that Allah gave him in his old age for falsely condemning Mu'adh ibn Jabal. So, I don't want people to get self-righteous or anything like that, myself included. But the point is, don't really. If people are talking, greet people. It's a joyous time. It's a time that we should do that. And then the other thing to remember is our brothers and sisters who are in great tribulation now. The people of Palestine, the people of Iraq, the people of Algeria, the people of Bosnia, the people of India. I could go on and on and on, and I don't want to. Those people really are suffering, and so temper your joy with some gravity as well. So one of the things about light that I learned a long time ago, and I think it's really true, is that sometimes a people's reaction to a lot of spiritual light is to get giddy and laugh and get frivolous. Right? And you can see that in people. And it's a way of spilling light. And Ramadan can do that to people. They'll get, because there's so much light, that they'll end up kind of laughing the whole month. Seriously, I really mean it. People will end up just kind of spending it, having a good time. And what they're doing is because they haven't learned how to contain, the benefits, they just spill it all out. Right? So try to contain the benefits of that. I think we're gonna. Is the bus here? Is that class gonna go? Yeah, I'm going to come back after the Dhuhr. After the Asr. But are they going to leave now? Okay, then what I'll do before we pray, because there's still a little bit more time, I wanted to read from the section on fasting from the Muwatta for the barakah of it. And, what's that? Okay, I'm glad you mentioned that. The other thing, Imam Malik radiallahu anhu, during Ramadan, he did not like storytelling and he said this is a time of qiyam and qira'ah. So the best dhikr during Ramadan is Qur'an. That you should still do the sabah and nasa. Those are really important to do in Ramadan as well as any other time. But you should have your wird of Qur'an. Imam Abu Hanifa radiallahu anhu said that Quran, if you read it at least twice a year, then you're not considered jati. In other words, there's an ayah in the Quran, where Allah, the Messenger of Allah complained about in the Qawm yattakhidhu hadha Quran mahjura, that his people have just neglected or left the Quran. And Ramadan is a time where we should be trying to spend a lot of time with the Book of Allah, and so preferably if you can do more than one khatam, that would be good. There are people, and I know somebody personally, that he did, I think, 26 khatams in Ramadan. But that's mostly what he was doing. Obviously people that are working and things like that, so it's difficult, to do that. If you're not as proficient with it, there's also the listening to the muqri, if you have the taste. In other words, when you're driving, if you don't memorize a lot of Quran, it's better to read when you memorize, but when you're driving. But if you don't, then just listen to the Quran, the recitation, and also do some tadabbur of the Quran during Ramadan. In other words, don't just do the ta'abbud of it, but do some tadabbur. If you can do, there's a 7-day word of the Quran, which is reading. It goes 3, 5, 7, 9, 11, and then the Mufassal. You read the first 3 surahs, and for the first day, and then the first 3, and then the 5, the next 5 surahs, and then the next 7, and then the next 9, and then the 11, and then 13, and then the Mufassal. So in 7 days you could finish. The Mufassal is from Abasa to the end of the Quran, or Hujarat. And with the 13, I think, goes to, not Abasa, Qaf. So the point is that that's the way a lot of setups did the Quran. They would do it by the odd 3, 5, 7, 9, 11, 13, Mufassal, like that. I wouldn't pray, if you owe a fard, I would not pray Taraweeh. You should do the fard. Use it as a time to gain all your fard back. Yeah, I would do, instead of Qiyam, do all the fard. Because if you owe prayers, in Hanbali madhab they don't make them up. Right? But Malik and Hanafi and Shafi'i do. If you owe prayers, then you have to, in the Maliki madhab, you'd only do witr and the raghiba. You do the witr prayer and the pre-dawn prayer. Other than that, and you should do, according to, al-Akhbari, if you do less than 5 at every prayer, then you're mufarrat throughout the year. If you owe prayers and you do less than 5, then you're mufarrat. You're not doing enough. Yeah, with every prayer. And what you should do is do the minimal amount. That if you owe a lot, if you don't owe that many, I wouldn't do this. If you owe a lot, like years, then do the minimal amount for the prayer to be valid. It's a debt that you owe, and inshallah Allah will accept the...
A lot of what the brother was speaking of, if you're in a situation like today, or a lot of prayers, what we want to do is definitely remember.
Then what the ulama says is that you should do the best to estimate. In other words, if you left the prayer, say, you remembered that you were 17 or something like that. People should know around when they stop praying, hopefully. It probably is a point they've started going seriously astray in their life, so that should be, most people remember when they go astray. By the middle of prayer, in other words, what you should do is do the arkan and the basic sunan that are mu'akkada, right? And that's it. So there's, the 16 arkan and the 8 sunan mu'akkada, and
Also, like,
Yeah, I mean, that, I think, you just I know there's some people that would say you should make them up, and I think that you just, if you're learning fiqh now, then that's something you just make tawbah and ask Allah. If in other words you had a fard ayn that you didn't learn, and now you're learning it, I would just, ask Allah to forgive you. Some people, for a lot of Muslims, they were not aware that fard ayn was an obligation. In other words, their parents never told them. They really didn't know. And so in a sense, I mean, this is an itham that really is going back, right? Because a Muslim the child is an amana, and one of the amanas that you're supposed to do is teach them the fard ayn. So I know a lot of Muslims who were not told any of these things, and they just thought they were praying right. And I think those people, inshallah, I would just, I would say, make tawbah, just ask Allah, inshallah, to excuse you for your ignorance and to accept those prayers. But I wouldn't, Allahu alam, I wouldn't, I think that might be, Raghiba is no. Some of the ulama say you do the nafila of at least 2 rakats of Maghrib. There's a khilaf about that. Do you know anything? About the rakat after Maghrib. No, to make them up if you... Not to make them up, but if you should continue doing. I think there's a khilaf, I'm not sure if it's mashhur or not, but definitely the witr and the raghiba should be done in spite of fard prayers owed. What do you mean? Yeah, if you have time to make up your prayers, that's what you should be doing. Ibadah should go to the fard. ما تقرب إلي عبدي بشيء أحب إلي أو أحب إلي مما افترضت عليه. My servant doesn't draw near to me with anything more beloved to me than the fard. So fard is over everything. Really. If you're doing nafila and you're fard, you're wasting your time. No, if they're less than 5, then you should do them in order, right? If they're more than 5, then you should you just do them at the time. Like for instance, if you owe tartib, order is obligatory if it's less than 5. If it's more than that, then you don't have to do them in order. And some of the ulama say if you owe a lot, then what you do is you just pick a certain amount, at least 5. So you do 5 prayers at Dhuhr, 5 prayers at Asr, 5 prayers at Maghrib, 5 like that. So you don't have to do them in order. Is the bus here? Yeah. Okay, I'm there. Jazakumullah khairan.
I got to go see for a second.
Oh. Yeah.
The announcement because I'm going to put some money for the student and going to some books.
Oh, okay. Inshallah, a couple of... One, I want to... Because this is the last class. For people that are going on the intensive, Jazakumullah khairan, and tawfiq, inshallah. And I want to thank all of you for the attendance and the respect and the... just the general good spirit that's been present throughout the whole course. And, excuse me for any shortcomings or any breaches of courtesy. And make dua also.
يا لطيفا لم يزال الطف بنا فيما نزال إنك لطيف لم يزال الطف بنا والمسلمين